I hope people are doing well. I wanted to go over a little bit more about the biomorphic abstraction, talk about that a little bit more by showing several different examples. And we're going to look at examples from the class next week. So please make sure that you get all those or get that done. Now, I was told that the kit is a little bit different than ones we've had before, that there are two blocks, foam blocks that are glued together. And and there isn't like a smaller one for base, that's totally fine. You can make a base out of a cardboard box or something else. Do not separate those blocks. I mean that's what you should be carving. That's what you should be working with. The high density foam that we were able to get is only about a couple inches thick, and in order to make a block big enough that you can carve, we had to glue that together. So yeah, don't separate that out at all. I wanted to quickly recap our discussion last week just a little bit and tell you about something that I did um, regarding the quiz. Everybody should have in their mailbox, and I'm sorry I did not send this out earlier, but I did put the images from the quiz into a PDF. I also put the, well, what's it called? The URL for those images. They are all royalty-free images off of Wikimedia, and they should be really easy to access. But I put the actual URL as a clickable link in to the quiz itself, and that should be working, as well as revamping the photos there. So you should have updated photos in the quizzes, and in your email, you should have a PDF that has those photos. So if anybody has a problem seeing any of that stuff, or if the links aren't working or anything, please email me right away. And okay, I'm sorry. I was a little bit distracted looking at something, just double checking. Okay. As you are getting ready to do this, what I wanted to do is just show you some examples that other people have done. Okay. And what I'm trying to do right now is get the screen so that we can do the screen share and get rid of the person's name so we don't see it. And that is proving to be more difficult than I expected. I'm going to go through, see if we can do that. Okay. I'm going to try to make sure that we don't see people's names on this. And that may be a little bit tricky because I don't want you guys to, I want you to be able to trust me that I'm not going to share your information with everybody. So let's see if we can do this really quick here. Okay. What I'm going to do is, as we go to each image, we're going to try to scroll the name out of the way so we don't see it. And then I will also try to make these so that the images are in separate files. But anyway, you don't need to worry about that. Is when you guys submit stuff, I may or may not use your images in future classes, but I don't want you to have to think that I'm going to put your name on it because I'm going to try to remember not to. And I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to try to remember not to. I'll do whatever I can to protect your privacy. There we go. Okay, here we go. So what we're going to do first is do a brief recap of the biomorphic abstraction idea of abstract realism to abstraction that we talked about last week. Then I want to look at a couple examples from professional artists, and then I want to I'll go through and start going through images from previous classes, and we'll just talk about them. There's a good chance you guys have never met the people who made these carvings, so I think we'll be okay. All righty, let's see if we can do this. Okay. Okay. All righty. Again, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get this tech to work. It's interesting because sometimes we've had everything has worked really, really well, and sometimes it hasn't. And I woke up, well, actually, it was, for example, um, it was just fine earlier, but then I just discovered that I just discovered that none of the images on this quiz were working for anybody. And it was funny. That was funny to me because an hour ago it was working just fine. So, anyways, I don't know why. What's going on with that? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen now. It's it's a little bit aggravating to me because I said all this stuff before class, and then when class starts, everything stops working. And it's just a little bit aggravating. Okay, that's not what I wanted. Okay, here we go. All right, so this we talk a little bit about biomorphic abstraction. And last week we did talk a little bit about organic nature of forms. And the quiz is a question about form and shape. And those that answer, what the difference is, comes directly from the textbook. Form is shape is something that takes place in a two-dimensional realm, like when you're painting or drawing, and form takes place in the three-dimensional realm. And the difference is going to be like the shape. A shape would be a circle, a form would be a sphere, and that's pretty much what the difference is. And when we're talking about biomorphic, it's really important to talk about what abstraction is too. And I'm certain that you guys in your classes have been at least introduced to abstraction, seen abstract paintings. And there's a lot there that is very difficult to deal with because abstraction in the 20th century became very quickly the realm of elitist sellers and buyers. The artists were doing what they felt driven to do, but when it left the artist's control, it very quickly became an elitist type of thing, which is really unfortunate because instead of communicating with viewers what abstraction was, it became in the interest of the people that sold the work to pretend that if you didn't get it, nobody could explain it to you. And it became in the interest of collectors to proliferate that same kind of fiction, and which is really unfortunate because abstraction is essentially a simplification of the shared visual cues that we have to navigate the world. And if you see some sculptures will address the idea of movement instead of showing an object that is in the process of moving. And that is what abstraction is about, where the artist is trying to be as honest as they can and sharing with you the feelings and impressions they have instead of just giving you another object to look at that is the same but a different color or placement or material than what you would see every day. So abstraction means simplification. And there are two different kinds of abstraction. There's what we think of as regular abstraction, where it's objects that are simplified, and non-objective. And non-objective is a type of abstraction where we're talking about um, simplified forms that may not have ever existed in the three-dimensional world. Now, what this is, from last week, you remember there's 8 different images, and it's trees going from fairly naturalistic. These two are really naturalistic depictions of trees to things where we start seeing stylized. And notice that the tree is being simplified. And we're going from this naturalistic to this stylized. And that is an abstraction. Now, this isn't completely abstract like we think of as modern art or anything like that. We can still identify the elements. It's stylized. And this as well, this is also abstracted. It is simplified, but we can still easily identify the visual elements that go into making the tree. We still read that as a silhouette of a tree. And then you get to the kanji, and this is where we start exploring the realm of non-objective as well. This is a symbol in Japanese that represents a tree. And we can see kind of a little bit of a relationship, but it's simplified to the point where it's almost impossible to identify what it is without context. And that's where it starts getting really abstracted. Things like lettering, the letters that cultures use, or symbols or signs for language, they've gotten so abstracted from whatever they were originally that they became identifiers for ideas rather than uh, simplifications of real world forms for the most part. And this is so abstracted that the only way we can tell that there's trees is because we associate certain colors with trees. And we talked about Mondrian, where he was trying to show people his process of simplifying the world around him by relegating all lines to horizontal and vertical lines and all color to primary colors and green for the most part. That's what he did. And these are all painted by Mondrian, from kind of impressionist, expressionist stuff. He was also an impressionist. He did both things, where he's abstracting the tree, where he's taking away a lot of the color and he's just playing with the lines because he's enjoying the lines, to where the colors really don't bear an awful lot of resemblance to the originator. And the only thing that makes us feel even tree-like is the swooping lines. And this, we get to a point where it's so abstracted, it's impossible to tell what it is. That's what these three are. More and more abstraction until we get to a point where this feels like it is just blocks of color with black lines. And this is where, unless you know for sure by talking to the artist that they started with an actual object, since it doesn't feel like it has any root in the natural world, a lot of people identify this as being non-objective. And again, non-objective means not a simplification or not inspired by the real world or not having its origins with anything in the real world. Um, that's what, because the name non-objective means non-object. It's not inspired by an actual object. And so that's a really quick recap of that. And the artists that we have in the background for this, um, I'm pulling that up really quick here too. And I just found out as well something. One of the links just died this morning. I can't get it to work. So we're going to share this tab. This is the background. All of these artists that are talked about are um, doing stuff that is very much in that biomorphic realm. And Barbara Hepworth, I know this video isn't working. I'll have to find another one to share with you. But like I said, that only stopped working this morning. So, and if we go over to the Barbara Hepworth website, I think this is an excellent example of biomorphic abstraction. Now you look at this sculpture, it's really hard to see where the origin comes from, but it looks vaguely like, a human-like shape. That's what I really like about having this woman standing here, is that you kind of see her face, the line of her cheek, the neckline of her blouse, her hair, and it kind of resonates right up here in this area. And she's standing there holding something. It almost feels like it's an echo of this part. Maybe this is the torso. Maybe this is an arm. Maybe both of these are arms and the torso is invisible. And then we get down here and you have the hem of the skirt and then her feet. This line right here may suggest something like the hem of the skirt and the feet. If you saw this by itself, I'd be hard pressed to believe that we could easily identify it as being linked to a human being. But when we're right next, you can see the relationship. And this is what abstraction is. All those things are simplified. And the artist has added other things that are meant to demonstrate or communicate their unique perspective. We have holes, we have these kinds of forms. But one thing you will notice too is that this is not mechanical looking. It's not full of completely straight lines. It feels like there is an organic movement somehow. It almost feels like this is meant to mimic natural weathering. Almost, it feels like it's been polished and worn down by people touching it for hundreds and hundreds of years. And these kinds of smooth lines where you don't have the harsh, sharp edges demonstrate that organic component that I'm talking about. The biomorphic, remember, means life and move, putting them together. And that's what we're going for. We're looking for the organic movements that we associated with forms that come from life. Now, these are not, I think you can tell right away, these are not copies of seashells or anything like that, or teeth or anything like that. They're absolutely not copies of that. But they do feel to me like they are inspired by some of the naturally occurring forms that we see in nature. This looks to me like it is inspired by things like river rocks and naturally smooth stones. Now, that is not biomorphic in the literal sense. Most stones don't, except for like limestone, don't originate from living forms, but it has that kind of organic line and feel to it. It doesn't feel like it's necessarily made by precise machines. I don't see a lot of right angles or things like that. What I do see is these kind of ovals that are not mathematically exact ovals. They feel like they're a little bit wiggly. There's like this line right down here on this oval is not a straight or smooth, completely smooth line. It seems to jag in just a little bit right there. And that is the kind of thing. This gives it that kind of organic feel, which I really like. I'm a fan of Barbara Hepworth, so yeah, I don't want to go on too much because we'd spend a lot of time. Now, this on the surface of it does feel rather mechanical, but then when we look at it, it kind of wiggles a little bit. This line isn't completely straight. These lines are not completely straight. It is highly polished. This does feel a little bit organic, but it also feels it's metal and it does feel a little bit too smooth. I mean, this face is really, really flat, but because it's not doesn't have all straight lines and stuff, and the lines kind of wiggle and are not uniform, then we start moving into that realm of biomorphism. Now, this one, we are looking at a guy named um, Jan or Van Hans Arp, something like that. I'm sorry. um, he is one of the artists that we're looking at too. of course, Jean Hans Arp. And of course, since we're in class, I forgot his name. But he did a lot of two-dimensional stuff. And when you see his two-dimensional abstract work, I don't know if this relates to anything specific in the natural world, but it does relate to elements that are from the natural world. When I look at this, I'm thinking of things like maybe a tadpole's head, maybe leaf veins, maybe like the little tiny single-celled organisms that live in ponds. It almost feels like a tiny organ or bacterium or something like that. And he was really good at making these kinds of forms that feel almost like they could be alive. And then from going from 2D, he went to 3D and started sculpting as well. And we can see some of his things right here. This one to me, I don't know if you guys ever, if you guys remember your high school biology class and the models that some schools had of the inside of a single cell. This kind of reminds me of something like that. We can see again, there is not a one-to-one correspondence with anything. This isn't a puppy dog. This isn't um, an appendix. This isn't an actual cell, but there's elements to it that kind of remind us of that. This almost looks like one of those chromosome things, the little wiggly things that we see in high school biology. This almost looks like an organelle that we saw in high school biology, but they are forms that are kind of almost fluid, where they have an organic component to it. There aren't straight lines. It looks vaguely biological, and this is the kind of form that we're going for. And we can go through the other artists. Um, but I'm hoping you guys get that that idea. And all these artists that we look at, they did some very mechanical stuff as well as very organic stuff. All the artists are like that. But what we are looking for specifically is these organic components, the the kind of feel where it was inspired by the roots of teeth or underwater life or cells or how bones join together or different elements like that. It's not strictly mechanical. It's not it doesn't mimic the natural world directly. So we're not going to see like a dog's paw, but something like maybe you really like the shape at the base of a dog's claw and you like that. So you put that in and maybe you combine that with the foot pad of a cat, but not all the whole foot pad, maybe the central pad. You like how those forms are shaped. And you saw Jean Hans Arp, he did those drawing things, those with the piece of paper and the cutouts. You saw that they didn't quite look like a bacterium, but they kind of suggested it. Didn't quite look like a leaf, but it kind of suggested it. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking for. So in the time that I have left, I wanted to look at some of these drawings and images. And again, I'm apologizing. I'm trying to make sure that we don't see the names. And I don't know why it's giving me such a hard time today in doing this. Okay, I think I can figure it out. All right, here we go. Okay, that's not. Oh, that is not working. Okay. Give me just a second as I try to figure something else out. There we go. Okay. All right, this looks better. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to figure out the mechanics of my computer so we can do this. All right, now I'm hoping everybody can see this. This is a foam sculpture that somebody made. And, like I said, you have two blocks that are glued together, and you can see that right here. And then you can see that it was on a smaller block that somebody used as a base, which is okay. That's nice to use. Now, there are a couple of things that I want you to see in this. When I do my demonstration about how to carve this, what I'm trying to do a little bit is some of the one part of the carving is almost flat or scoop-like going in one direction. Another part of the carving is kind of flat and scoop-like going at almost 90 degrees. So I'm trying to use different angles. As you carve this, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is there cannot be any flat spaces. You do not leave any of the flat outside surface of the foam block. So right here is a flat area. We don't want that. That's everything needs to be carved. Another thing we need to do is make this feel organic and flowing. And um, what is really nice about this, you look at this and the whole thing kind of flows together. I don't see a one-to-one correspondence with anything. There isn't a puppy, there isn't a leaf, there's not a banana, there's nothing like that. What the person did was kind of make all these protuberances come out at different angles. And I really, really like that. It doesn't look like there's any remnant of that original block left. It doesn't feel like it is still a block. It feels like it's completely this form. By that I mean leaving, for example, the flat surfaces of the original block. We don't want to do that. And I think they did a great job at making this a very 3D um, kind of form where it doesn't feel like it is still part of that block. Let's see. So let me get the next one here. Okay. And we'll move to that one right now if we can. Now I've got to find where I was sharing this stuff. Oh, okay. Here we go. All right, here's the next one to look at. There are a couple things that I really like about this, and then a couple things that I feel are, oh no, I'm sorry. Before we go to that, one of the things you're going to be doing with this in a couple weeks is covering it with paper mache. As part of that, you want to get this as smooth as you can. And that's why you have sandpaper in your kit. This is the texture you get after you're done carving, and you want to sand it down and get it really as smooth as you can. Now this is foam. Some of the sandpaper texture is going to pull up some of the foam, so you are going to get divots like this. That when they're this size, you can cover that with the paper mache. But for this sculpture, I would suggest before going to paper mache that the person sand it smoother so we don't see these kind of tool planes, because it still feels very chiseled. But when you sand it, you can sand it and smooth a lot of that out. Even if you dig out a little bit of this, it's nice to get rid of some of these tool planes. So if we looked at this one, now they did do a good job of sanding it. It is really smooth. Most of it is really pretty smooth. However, Some of the problems that we have are this feels like it's only been carved in this direction on one plane. It does, and it's been slightly rounded, but it doesn't feel, it still feels very much like it's beholden to that original block shape. And what I would suggest with this one is that they go in and carve this out instead of just slightly rounding these edges. Round this area so it starts feeling almost like a ball. Round this area so it almost feels like a ball. Maybe cut out some more of this on either side so it feels like a groove right there where you have two balls and then a groove in between them. And these four flanges that come out, maybe this one, there's enough material there where you can really round it off and make it feel very smooth and round. Maybe this one, we need to round those edges so we don't share a surface with the original block, but maybe rounding off or carving off more on the front side of this one so it feels like it's almost leaning towards the back side of this one so it kind of leans towards the front a little bit, and maybe trying to make this one just as round as possible. So what I'm talking about is these edges, they are smooth, but it still feels very much that the surface is flat, and we don't want that. We want it to feel organic throughout, not just have an organic silhouette. So that one becomes a little bit problematic. Let's see. All right, this next one is a really good one. I really like this one. I think it's a great example. Okay, let's see if we can see it. That's the big thing. Okay, we've already seen that one. Okay, there we go. Yes, this is good. All right, now let me tell you the things that I really like about this one. I think this is a great example all the way around. Can you really see where the original surface of the block is on this? Well, I can because I happen to know this little area right here is the original surface. But they smooth things so nicely all the way around that it's almost impossible to tell that. Almost impossible. And once it's covered by paper mache, it's going to blend so well with everything else, it's going to look completely round. It looks like there is a little bit of the tooling there. We see a little bit of the surface there, but I don't think that that is all that bad right in this area. I think that they could sand it down just a little bit. And right through here, we see the marks from the scrapers that you have. I would say for this person, roll up the sandpaper around your finger and just go at that a little bit and smooth that out. But for the most part, this looks really smooth. This doesn't have a one-to-one correspondence with anything. It doesn't feel like it is meant to be like a dog or a cat or anything like that. It's it looks to me like it's a collection of globbies, for lack of a better term. And I think that that is really well done. So let me get another one here really quick. And we'll switch to that one. I wonder where, there we go. There it is. I'm going to Oh, wow. It blew up quite a bit. Okay. Now, this is a simpler one, but it still does a really good job of meeting the parameters of the assignment. There's no surface of that original block. It is rounded. It looks organic. It doesn't have a one-to-one correspondence with an object that we're familiar with, but it feels like it's inspired by things like, um, I don't know. I see like shoulders or elbows. I see knees kind of thing. I see those kinds of things showing up just because of the rounded nature of some of these things sticking out. Now, I think for the purposes of this class, since we're doing 3D, it might be nice to like smooth this edge towards the bottom down a little bit more so that it feels almost as if it's rotating away. Maybe I don't know, but I because it still feels very flat. It feels almost silhouette-y. So I would work on this one where I'm sanding that middle a little bit. I'm sanding this down and smoothing it out so it feels almost from the bottom to the top like it's rotating. I think that would be a really cool effect to give it, and that would definitely feel like it's very much three-dimensional. But I think that this one is another really good example. And you notice that some of these are photographed really well, and others are photographed not as well. I think for the most part, you guys are doing a really good job paying attention to um, how these need to look when we photograph them. And it's essentially we need to honor your artwork so people know um, to take it seriously. We want to document it so it represents what you do accurately. Okay, here's this one. Let's see if we, it's funny. Every time I'm showing you guys these things, it does it in a different order. All right, now there are a lot of really, really good things about this one. Notice that we don't see the original surface of the block anywhere. We don't see that there is a one-to-one correspondence with any real thing. What we do see is that there are these organic type of forms. This almost feels like an organic Fruit Loop or Cheerio or something like that. But it's that instead of being a true torus, it becomes lengthened just a bit, so it almost starts feeling like a very shallow barrel. It's not a true ring, and I like that. It's a little bit bulby at this side, bulby here, a little bit bulby right there, but there's no straight lines. And notice that they've carved into this quite a bit, carved into this quite a bit, and this bulbous part comes towards us. This almost feels like it's going away, and there's an extra bit hanging down right here. I think this is wonderful. We can't see any straight lines. There's no original surface of the original block. It's all carved, so it feels very, very organic. Um, some of the issues are this is not really super smooth. Now, this artist had told me that whenever they tried to sand this part, it just chewed up the foam. So, you can't, we're going to be covering that with paper mache. And if that's becomes an issue as you try to smooth it down, we'll figure out ways to work with it. But look at this area, and this feels like it's getting smooth there. But areas like this, where it has little bits coming off, not so much. So there is a balance that needs to be found between uh, smoothing it down so that it is nice and smooth when you do the paper mache on it, and where the sandpaper pulls too much of the foam away. We don't want the foam to be pulled away. Okay, so on to the next one. one of the things I do notice in some of these older classes, and I know that I have said this before, is that um, I, it is you owe it to yourself to photograph your stuff nicely. And this next one is better than some, but we're still dealing with the put it on the floor next to the wall kind of thing, and that detracts from your sculpture. And I'm moving forward. You see my forehead just because I couldn't see things right. All right, so here we go. All right, this is what I'm talking about. Now this is a brilliant way to get started, but it still feels very much like it's cut out just on one side and then sanded a little bit. And a big part of that is because this original side of that block is all still visible. It's still completely flat. So if this was your sculpture, what I would say is get your sandpaper out and start sanding around here with the sandpaper curled around your fingers and maybe make this valley go up a little bit more. Round this off so you don't have any of the original flatness of that block. Sand this a little bit more. So and you can sand it where you get a lot of material or you get just enough so you don't have any of that original material. But what I like is you'll look at these lines and they all kind of blend and smooth into each other. There's no jagged mechanical feeling corners or edges. And I think that is done really well. But again, one of the problems is, this is a 3D class and it looks like this person only cut from one orientation and then gouged out things to kind of touch the other sides. And we want it to be cut and formed so that everywhere you turn it, you don't see any of that original block, the outside surface of the original block. But I really like how this person started, and they did go back and they sanded more of that down, so it felt a lot more organic. This feels to me like it's almost like a bacterium that was standing up and got tired and squished down like a spring a little bit, maybe. That's, of course, that's not what it is, but it kind of feels that way. Okay. And one thing that I want to impress on you too is that these things that I'm showing you, these are, for many of these, the first iteration. And the person did touch it up. They did work on it a little bit more. And but I'm showing you the first iterations so that you get a sense as, or so we can talk about what needs to be changed. That's why I'm talking first iteration, or why we're looking at the first iterations. Okay, now this one I really, really like a lot. And, yeah, we can see there are some of these gouges and things like that. It's not all perfectly smooth, but they did a really good job smoothing it out. This is exceptional. They did a great job smoothing it out. Some of the things that I really like about it is you can't see any of that original surface of the first block. We do have kind of a relatively sharp edge here, but this shape kind of works with it. Maybe they can sand that down a little bit, but you notice right here, they didn't make these edges completely and fully rounded like they did here. They left them a little bit sharp like that. And in nature, there are things like the edges of fins, for example, and the edges of leaves that are a little bit sharp like that. And I love how they scooped in and scooped out, and the edges of this, it feels like something very different than like the edge of an envelope. It feels organic. It feels like a leaf almost has rolled over. And I like that. And I like these protuberances and bulbs coming out. I think that is very fun. It's going to be awful to try to do paper mache on this because you have all these interior cutouts, but this person figured out a way to get it to work. And I love this sculpture. I think it's great. Now this orientation is a fun orientation, but they could also put it on this leading edge. They could stand it up on that edge, and we could look at it, and it would really read well. I think. I think that's a really good example. Okay, and I'm trying to get another one here we can see right away. And this person photographed their thing in their home studio, which, and that ended up working out really well too. I think that I like if you guys can get in and do the sculpture studio, that's great. But if you can't, I mean, you can get these things to look great just at home. So let's find this one. Oh, I didn't know I could do that feature. We saw that one. We saw these others. We saw that one. Okay, this one, I am really impressed with this one. Because look at how smooth they were able to get that. Now, this is not a complicated sculpture like that one we just barely saw. Looked very complicated. I love how smooth and simple this is. It has these elements inside that look like they're attached very organically. You don't see any of the exterior out of the original block. Everything flows, and it flows really, really nicely. But it feels organic. It doesn't feel like they're copying anything specifically. This isn't like a sausage or something like that that you might see. um, I think they did a great job of that. And the next one, I realize the photo that I have is not showing it in its best light. So I'm going to change that so you see a little bit better view of this. And for these, when you take photos, it might be a good idea to move it around and take a couple photos and see which one you like that shows it off the best. Okay, I don't understand what's going on. Oh, here we go. All right. I don't know if you guys can hear in the background. Um, our Airedale Terrier, who really, if she's bored, she likes reminding everybody how bored she is. And that gets a little bit annoying, slightly. Okay, here's the next one. Now, there's a couple things that I really like about this. Again, we have that kind of ring shape, but what I like about it is that it's not a perfect ring. It's not a mathematically perfect ring. It has almost a corner right here and almost a flattish area right here. This person has carved it out of the foam block, so we don't have any of the original surfaces of the foam block again. I like the way that they carved this hole through the center. I think that is really fascinating to me. So I love the idea that this is an organic feeling ring. And then they have this protuberance coming up like this. And notice that they've made it so that it is a different thickness than the ring. It comes in a little bit and you kind of see that and it hooks around a little bit like that. and they've done a pretty good job smoothing it. For for this, before paper macheing, I would recommend that they smooth this even more right through there, so we don't have any of those tool lines. And maybe right through here a little bit, so we don't have that cavity there. But I really like this organic shape. I think that part is really, really solid. And one thing that I hope that you notice is that some of these are very complicated, some of them not as complicated, and this doesn't need to be complicated. What we are working at is we're looking for something that demonstrates that organic nature of the biomorphic idea, something that is abstracted, that is not something that you'll see walking down the street. And you're dealing with issues where stuff flows, um, the surface, the outside surface flows from one portion to another of this, and you have these areas that are not mechanical. You know, it feels like it could be a living thing. Maybe it's a living thing on a different planet. Okay, so the next one is, oh, I don't see it yet. There we go. Here we go. Now this one to me looks like something that was collapsed together like an accordion almost. And what I like about this is the actual block is about like this, and you can kind of see that a little bit, but it doesn't have any of that original outside edge of the block, outside surface of the block. And it just that they maximized as much of the volume of the block as they possibly could. And what I love is they've made these kind of uh, fleshy ribbon kind of shapes almost like these uh, like squishy pies are stacked on each other diagonally. This thing right here looks like it's a squishy pie that's folded over almost or something. It's really kind of fun. You have different kind of holes through it. Now this hole right here, this is a really sharp edge, but I don't know so much if that's a problem. It does, everything flows together really reasonably, and I don't think that's too much of a surprise. Maybe it is a little bit too sharp. Maybe that should be sanded down a little bit, but they've done a really good job with that, and you can see they've done a pretty solid job of sanding everywhere. We do see some tool marks like right through here, a little bit right through there, right through here. So that in that case, I would wrap the sandpaper around your finger and go at it a little bit. Try to get that smoothed out. Now, this next one person, um, they got ahead of themselves and a little bit. They uh, started on the paper mache element before getting everything photographed for this element. And so we're going to look at it. We're going to see what it looks like with the paper mache on it. And that, let's see. But I'm hoping that you guys can see um, the kind of form that they've created. Okay. Oops. There we go. And we'll talk about the form, and we'll talk a little bit about the paper mache, but we'll go back to the paper mache later when we get closer to needing to do it. Okay. Now this one I really like too. You have that kind of fleshy ribbon kind of feel. And that's kind of a fun thing for me to see. And you see where these folds go in, they sand it down, and the inside edge is kind of sharp, but that's just fine. The outside edges seem to reasonably fold in like that. You see this hole there, and it's everything is fluid and smooth, and it has this kind of self-consistent organic structure throughout. There aren't any hard abrasive edges. There's no shock. There's none of that original flat surface of the block is evident. Now, when we do the paper mache, one of the things you'll do is you'll do a coating of paper mache. you'll sand it down, do a second coating, and sand that down so it's smooth. And that's exactly what they did here and on this one. And you can see how that paper mache fills in some of those potential holes and unevenness that we saw in some of the other sculptures. And I think that this is another really good example. Again, it doesn't correlate one to one with an actual object or animal or anything like that, but it does have that kind of irregularity that we're associating with organic forms. And it feels very much like it is an organic thing. Maybe it's a portion of an organic thing. Maybe it's the inside of a cell. Maybe it's you know, an earlobe that's been folded over or something, and that's what inspired it. It, but it feels very abstract. You can't point to it and say, "Oh, I know exactly what that is." I think this is another really good example. So, and I like walking through these good and bad examples, so you guys see. Hopefully, you guys are seeing what is good to do and what types of things that need to be um, avoided. And one of the things, one of the things that I said is that each of these people that were doing these things, um, oh, here we go. Each of these folks, we talked about it, and if anything needed to be changed, they were able to go back and change it out. Now, this one, one thing that I really like about this one is, we do have that little flat spot. That's from the original. She did sand this down. They did sand this down, sorry. But one thing that I like about it is you see this area right here where it's kind of carved in a little bit. And it feels to me like this is going in one direction, and then this area kind of joins it at a different direction. And that is really cool to see. I also like how this feels like it all shares a surface, and then it starts going in a little bit right here, just like it, not as dramatically. This one, it looks like it's at a different orientation. This one, it looks like they just sanded it a little bit more to just kind of change up that shape a little bit. They did a really good job sanding this down for the most part. It's really smooth through here, and most of those tool marks are gone. I For this one, they need to sand it a little bit more through here so it's smoother. Sand this down and curve it while they're sanding it so we don't have that flat surface there. Sand the tool marks down here. But the sanding, I think, on some of these might actually take a little bit longer than the carving that you do. Just trying to get it really smooth. And be very careful because the heavier grit sandpaper is really good for rapidly removing stuff. And but the finer grit is really good for getting it very smooth. And that is definitely something that we should talk about for just a second. When you do this, I would recommend getting like a lawn and garden garbage bag, one of the big ones, slitting down the bottom and one of the long edges, and that will give you a big plastic tablecloth that you can work with. And I would just tape it over the table that you're working on and just try to keep your mess as much as possible on that. When you do clean up, uh, the foam is really it's very clingy. There's a lot of static that is involved, and one way that helps to clean it is if you guys have like a spray bottle of water. Doesn't take a lot of water, just a little bit of water, but the spray bottle is really good at kind of breaking some of that static cling so that you can then like wipe it up with wet paper towels and stuff like that. But I would do the best you can to try to do it all in one or at the most two sessions and make sure that everybody knows what you're doing because I think I mentioned that a couple years ago, somebody's mom and dad were visiting, and mom thought that it was just a mess and cleaned it up and threw it away. and just a wee bit traumatic. But because the person, remember last week we talked about process photos where you do it as you're going, you photograph as you're going. Because the student did that, they were able to uh, get credit for everything that they had done. Okay, it looks like I have an emergency that I have to attend to really quick, so I'm going to stop this right now. I'm going to stop recording, and I will come back to this in just a minute. And and so I'll have you watch both videos, but I've got to attend to something right away. And as soon as I come back, I will start recording again, and so you'll have two videos to watch.